they tossed the dice, it had to be. The only one for me is you, and you for me. So happy together. I can't say loving nobody but you for all my life.
Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP here and Charles Rosenay, and let me tell you, it gives me the greatest pleasure to speak to one of the rock and roll royalty, Howard Kaylan. How are you today, Howard?
Never better, sir. Feeling very well. Thank you. You too, I hope.
You look great, my friend.
Compared to what, sir? You know, when you've looked like this since you were 20, it's easy to keep looking great.
And the voice still in shape. If you needed to belt it, you could do it right now, right?
If I had to sing stratospheric parts for Mark Bolen, it would be a simple thing to do.
Wow.
Howard, I've seen your documentary, right? It's the greatest documentary where you explain about your managers and how you used to sign in the hotels under the name of Jerry and the Pacemakers and how you met the Beatles. Could you go through that story for all the great fans out there?
That's, you know, you're talking about like 7 years of my life in that sentence. Now, I'm not sure I can encapsulate that so quickly for you guys, but there were a whole bunch of events there that were kind of separate from each other. But let me see, addressing them one at a time if I can. We were just a bunch of punks. We're still punks. We're just older punks. But we were really punks once as young snivelly kids in high school, and we just didn't know anything better. So we were a surf band, and the Crossfires was our name. And that's all we did was play surf music. That's all we knew was music from like Johnny and the Hurricanes and the Ventures and the Dakotas even. I mean, we stretched our long fingers even across the ocean at that time to find surf music from everywhere. But that's all we knew. We did a couple of, necessary R&B songs in our teenage set because everybody wanted to hear Money and What I Say and the songs that they could boogie to as 15-year-old kids on a teenage slippery linoleum dance floor. And then we just graduated up. When the Beatles came along, we put down our saxophones, my friend and I, and decided we were singers. So we sang. That was all there was to it. We did whatever was required of us, the hits of the day, because the kids would, leave if you didn't play, Peter and Gordon's new song or something. So we had to do all that stuff. And then since we were in Los Angeles, in a suburb, there were big rock acts that were actually coming through our vicinity and needed backup bands. So we backed up everybody in America as they came through. And that was our education. And it was also our primitive way of networking because we were able to meet people that would come into our lives later, like Sonny and Cher. When they needed a backup band, we were their guys. So we came with them into Hollywood and we played a few shows at this little dinky mob club on Sunset Boulevard called the Red Velvet. That's trouble. And we actually worked with them at the Hollywood Bowl and a couple of other places early in our turtley career, as soon as we had changed our name from the fascist sounding Crossfires to the deceivingly porky and dumb sounding Turtles, a name that plagued us, I think, forever. I don't know about that. Had we been called Air Supply or something, I think our longevity would have, carried us a little bit farther. Come on now. You have to admit, of all the animal names that you can think of, that's certainly one of them.
Well, I have a question because you mentioned going to California, but before that, you guys recorded stuff as kids in Coney Island whatever happened to those songs? Are you ever going to release those?
Are you kidding? I was 4 years old. No, I'm never going to release those.
They have to
That
be.
would be insane. I believe they exist. They still exist. But I don't think anybody needs to hear my version of some of those great Broadway tunes that my parents instilled to my very young, supple, idiot mind.
Fans demand that stuff.
No nonsense. They don't.
We
I don't
do.
believe there's a fan in the world that would like a 4-year-old's recording of anything.
Yeah, well, if McCartney had a 4-year-old doing Broadway, and Howard Kaylan had that, and we put together an album of that, I think that would be a top seller.
If Paul produced it and put his name on it, it might be.
It's amazing how you guys, loved the Beatles and, reached that level of maybe not, the universal greatness, but hit after hit after hit. And your voice, right up there with the best of the rock and roll voices of all time. And I don't think that is enough credit for all that.
That's what you just said. There is more credit than certainly I'm due. You just sing the songs. They bring you the songs, you listen to them. And in my case, you just, you have to go, yeah, I like that one, I'll sing it. Or, no, you're out of your mind, give that to, Gary Lewis or something. Everybody was coming up in Hollywood at the same time. And we were just another one of those bands. We were lucky enough to have a record label, such as it was. It was mostly just a warehouse. But they had a pressing plant and they printed labels. So it was good enough for me. And they were able to get the stuff out there, which was the only thing we really cared about. It wasn't really, we didn't know anything about promotion. We didn't aspire to be anything bigger than we certainly turned into. So, there's a certain level of peaceful mediocrity, I believe, that you can achieve. See, the problem in my vision is that everybody wants to be number one. And I think that's ridiculous. I've always held the contention that it's a lot safer to shoot for like number 6 because nobody gives a shit. No one ever tries to shoot down number 6. That's the safest thing in the world. And it's still enough. You're a top 10 guy. You've had a hit record. Nobody's going to recognize you when you walk into a wimpy bar or something, but that's wonderful. You don't need that in your life anyway. And if you can, kind of crawl along, cashing those 6-figure checks instead of the 7-figure checks, yeah, you're not running with Beyonce, but by the same token, you don't have to put up with Jay-Z.
Plastic, he's very modest, right?
I got to say to you, every time I've seen Howard on the TV, I'm serious. His documentaries and that, he has a sense of humor, and the guy is so intelligent. You got no idea. And I got to ask you, when Chip Douglas left to be the producer of the Monkees, can you tell me what that was like when he left and what you thought of the Monkees?
I love those guys. Everybody loved those guys. They were universally liked because they were all nice people. It wasn't that they were luckier than anybody else, although they were. There were very few people who resented those guys. I just looked at them as if they were, they were trying really hard to be America's little Beatles on a television level. And they more than succeeded. I think they surprised even their producers with how popular they became, even and aside from the show. And I saw them perform when all 4 of them were on the stage, and they were good. I mean, they were a really good band. So you can't fault them. You can't fault their material. It was the greatest. They had the best writers in the world, from Goffin and King to Neil Diamond. I mean, how do you go wrong? And the production was flawless, always flawless. And Chip brought a great thing to them because he knew they were a band. And he recorded them as a band, and he didn't want to use extra players and professional musicians because that that ruined everything, you know, when the Wrecking Crew was playing on the Beach Boys records at the same time that they were playing on the Monkees records and the Mamas and Papas records. Nobody maybe would have noticed it, but the players did. I mean, the real musicians out there did. You could put on a record, you could hear a Hal Blaine drum fill at the start of a song and know right away what you were getting yourself into. You know, it was a guaranteed good rock track and stuff. And you also knew that there wasn't anybody from the band playing on that session, you know, and it was a problem that I believe was just endemic to the rock and roll scene on the West Coast, certainly, as it was with a different set of players in the East. You know, when you heard a Rascals record start, you know, nobody fooled themselves into thinking that was Dino Danelli. That wasn't Dino Danelli. You know, in person, that guy could twirl sticks and he was a mother. But on the records, they couldn't take that chance. You know, you were talking about Atlantic Records money then, big time. It wasn't like Turtles. Turtles went into the studio, there was just 6 guys, you know, and an engineer. We crossed our fingers and hoped it would work. Yeah, with everybody else, you know, it was big time record business. We were small potatoes. It was garage band stuff. But when you had, you know, Columbia Pictures money invested in a project like the Monkees, it had to pay off.
Say no more. A specific question: To See the Sun and the Owl, recorded but unreleased in '68. Was that supposed to be part of a whole album, a concept, or just a single? Do you remember that part?
I remember everything about it. And quite frankly, we didn't know what the hell it was. We didn't know what it was when we recorded it. We didn't know after the fact either. The record company certainly didn't have a clue. It was so psychedelic, and we were so psychedelic that we were lucky to have crawled out of Chess Studios in Chicago with anything.
Wow.
Did you ever come to Australia?
Yes, sir. We went to Oz twice, but not as Turtles, certainly. That would have been terrific. I would have loved that. But we had, you know, that was, again, something that was the purview of the record company. And our record company, they were lucky to get a leased Mercedes out of the deal every month. So they were in no position to put us on a Qantas plane to any place. And we didn't have any support from a label in Australia at all. There was nothing there. It was, you know, White Whale Records, our record company in America. They made their deals, you know, over breakfast at some coffee shop on Hollywood Boulevard called Aldo's. I watched it happen a couple of times. It was a handshake, you know, and then something went down and somebody opened the trunk of a car, and then there was some nonsense in the parking lot. But it wasn't anything that I could control, and it wasn't good. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't until we went down to Australia, in fact, as Flo and Eddie, that we had any contact at all with the good people of your country, which is really ridiculous. I mean, it's a big world, you know, and you would think that if you were having any modicum of success in any of the areas that you could get to by plane, that you would do it. Say hello to everybody and, you know, hope that you could sell maybe another record or two the next time around. But these guys didn't really have the insight to see that coming.
Too bad.
So we never made it down there. And the first time we did come down to Australia, let me see, what was the record that was involved? It was, I think, Moving Targets, or maybe the one before it. It could have been the one before it. But at the time, Columbia Records, which is a giant record label in America, I mean, just one of the mega labels. I believe it had an office in Australia that was a guy on a desk and a secretary, and if I'm not mistaken, a macaw. I don't believe the macaw was answering phones, but it was a small operation. There wasn't anybody there. So when we went down there expecting, oh, this is going to be great, all the Columbia people are going to be there. Well, a lady and a macaw, that's not enough. And so it sort of fell apart. and our tour fell apart. We were under the auspices of a guy who I don't believe actually had a phone number. It was pretty rough. The gentleman meant really well. He was a really good guy. But I got to say, we should have known from the very first that our Australian tour was destined for trouble, because the first place we played was Toowoomba. Have you ever been?
Yeah, that's
Where's
a place.
that?
But I also got to say, I've got a very good photographer friend of mine in Sydney, and he was at the concert in 1973, and he's taken a lot of photos from that concert.
I think by 1973, we were kind of remembering everything. We knew where we were. So that's good.
And also, it was at the Sydney Town Hall, and your backup band was Jojo Zepp and the Falcons.
Oh, I remember those guys. I do remember that. I remember the backstage area. I kind of remember the food. That's the stuff you would call. I remember the tea service. I remember the food. I kind of remember the lady who was serving the food and her daughter. You always remember the daughter.
I've got the poster here. I don't know if you can see the poster, but there's the poster from the show.
Yes, I do see it. Flo and Eddie over Australia.
Wow.
I remember that. I remember that. And a wonderful thing happened. The partnership of Evans and Gadinsky got involved with us right at that moment. We were stranded in Australia, literally stranded. The tour, such as it was, limping toward its conclusion, but the promoter of the tour was kind of on a fast train to Perth. So we didn't know what we were going to do. And then these wonderful gentlemen stepped in and said, "We like your record. Tell you what we're going to do. We'll finish the tour for you." And we talked to the Macaw, and they're going to let you out of your Columbia contract if you want to come along with us and sign with Mushroom. Well, hell yeah, let's do that. And that really was wonderful. They saved both of those albums, and they were great with us on tour and in the record business. And they were wonderful, wonderful guys. So my memory of Australia wound up being just wonderfully pleasant. They made everything first class. And at the time, Skyhooks was their big band.
Yeah, that's right.
And I loved those guys. I love Shirley. I love the whole band, the sound, his voice, the sound of that rhythm section. What a wonderful organization. They were great kids and great records. I mean, ego is not a dirty word. They just wonderful classic rock songs. The fact that they weren't as big as certainly, like Rush or in the States, I really couldn't believe it. Their day should have been, in the 70s, they should have been gigantic in America. They really should have been. I love those guys.
Howard, is there any chance that either the history of Flo and Eddie and the Turtles or the Winds of Flo and Eddie and the Rhythm Butchers, will those ever be released on CD?
The Rhythm Butchers going digital is the equivalent of, how shall I say it? Polishing a turd. You can't repackage that stuff. The fact that it was released at all just shows that there was an abundance of vinyl and cardboard in America, and people with time on their hands and disposable money, because those things probably never should have been issued by anybody, let alone more than one volume, let alone like how many came out, like 9 or something. 9 of those Rhythm Butchers records. Wow. And, really the balls of the people who kept buying those things and understood what they were. I wish I had a list, because they would be on the no-fly zone in Palm Springs, California. I would make sure those guys never get into a local LA airport.
Well, let me ask this. Lady O, which I love, it's always mentioned that's like the final Turtles recording. but yet Turtle Recordings continued with Shell Shock right into the early 70s, right?
Well, it wasn't that wasn't our fault. We didn't wish that to happen. But when we left the label, there was just a bunch of stuff that had not come out. The entire project that we did with Jerry Esther,
Yeah.
right, had not been released yet. So White Whale, and the White Whale had a bunch of other stuff that they sort of liked, but they weren't sure. And some of the things were unfinished. Some of the things we intended to put orchestration to, like "So Goes Love" and some of those, ballad pieces. And you listen to them now, the way they just sort of shoved them out. They just shoved out the demo releases. They didn't really care much about it. And, as demos, they still hold up okay. But they would have been so great, had we had the chance to go in there and do what we wanted to do, because the difference between our version of Happy Together without the orchestra and what happens when that orchestra gets laid in there is just incredible.
Yeah.
It's magic time. So, that blend, I think it's achieving the blend between the voices that were used as instruments and the rest of the instruments in the mix that makes all of those babas, seem more magical than looking at the page and going, ba, 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 what's that? What the hell is that? But if you can sing along to it, it's okay. I can still spell Mississippi because I can sing the song.
Working with Mark Bolen, I mean, that blows my mind. Aren't they great songs and a great artist?
He was fantastic. He was a wonderful, wonderful human. I truly loved that guy. And we had our differences of opinion, certainly, and a big row in the 70s that almost ended our entire friendship, but it didn't. It didn't end the friendship. And I'm lucky that I'm blessed with knowing Mark at the golden point in his life when he was just sailing. I watched him take off, and we were aghast at how big he became and how wonderful it was to see him, because he didn't change. He was the same guy. And he was always, to me, he was Mark Feld. So all of the Bolen stuff was just something he put on with the top hat.
To me, John Barbato was, to me, a fantastic drummer. He just helped that Turtle sound. You'd agree with that?
Absolutely. Johnny was integral in making the Turtle sound bigger than it was. I mean, if any other drummer had been in that band, if the drummer, not to cast aspersions, but had our original drummer, Don Murray, stayed with the Turtles, it wouldn't have been the same group. The songs certainly wouldn't have sounded the same. Those drum fills from hell never would have been there. Barbato, I think, was as good a rock drummer as there ever was, certainly on pop songs. Mm-hmm. He had an incredible Buddy Rich-like knowledge of the drums, and he never stopped learning. And so every night, the cost of that was, here comes the drum solo. But the good news was, here comes the drum solo. So, I mean, had it been a tragic drum solo, then it would have been, night after night of misery, but they never were. It was always fantastic. And at the end of the drum solo, Johnny would dance around his drums and play the rims and stuff and get down on his knees and razzmatazz. And it was good old showbiz vaudeville stuff. And that's why it worked. It worked because it's formula showbiz stuff.
You and Mark Vaultman, you're just a pair of guys that when you're together, you just click and you're so funny. Like there's not many bands that have a sense of humor and don't take themselves so serious. Like you guys were the greatest. And it's like, it's easy because you were there, you're the person, but I'm an outsider, baby boomer, looking at you guys. And as you go through the 70s, and there's no one like you. It's like, how can I explain it? A pair of two guys that click, but they've got the greatest intelligent sense of humor.
Yes, agreed.
You guys, well, thank you. But I don't, unfortunately, senses of humor or sense of humors is not something that is generally rewarded in our culture here anyway. Certainly, it doesn't really go hand in hand much with rock and roll. And since Frank died, there aren't very many people holding up the torch. I mean, when you say rock and humor, most people in this country are going to say, "Yeah, Weird Al," because he's the only guy who even does anything on a Spike Jones kind of level that
Yeah.
kids can wrap their heads around. Kids, I say kids, anybody under 75 is a kid to me.
You're before Al. That's the difference. Do you know what I mean? You're on those documentaries and you're on those films. And that's why I'm saying you guys are like pioneers. There's no question in my mind.
Well, thank you. But pioneers don't get checks. Nobody's writing a check to Gabby Hayes these days. His estate is just tumbling tumbleweeds. So all I ever needed was, an appreciation. I never needed a check, fortunately, and that's why I can comfortably at this age just retire from the road and just say, I've done it, mate. My whole thing is I never wanted to wind up with my last headline being maid can't open Holiday Inn door, call security. That's not it. I don't want to be the Doc Martin shoe that's stuck in the door and they can't open it. And there's the maid card outside and we can't get 404 to answer. Well, that's because, somebody slipped him some fentanyl last night in his Hawaiian punch. God knows, but I don't want to be the guy out there experimenting with egg dishes and backstage food. I realized that at a concert that I did several years ago. In fact, on the occasion of my 70th birthday, when one of the girls in the crew came out with a cupcake and the two numbers 7 and 0 stuck into the cupcake in plastic letters. And I looked at that and went, oh yeah, I can't be doing this.
About 20 years ago, 2003, you reunited with Mark, John Sider, and Jim Pons. That was about the closest there was to a Turtles reunion. I think it was a fundraiser at the David.
What was it? You have to refresh my memory, Charles.
It was September 2003. It was at the David Center, and it was a fundraiser in New York.
Oh, the David Center. Well, we did that particular event because David was the handicapable son of Jim Pons.
Oh.
And so it was a very personal cause. And had he not asked personally, I don't think I would have been involved. We've got our own charities that we are both into. So, but that was very special. So yeah, I'm not surprised that we were all together at the same time then, but I never really put that together as a reunion of any sort. It was just something that we did.
Closest, right? Yeah.
I guess it was the closest. John Sider, I wish he had the chance in our group to fulfill his dreams too, because he had lofty ambitions with Spanky and our gang. And he was a very good drummer, totally different from Johnny Barbato in style. Mm-hmm. Johnny was always on top of the beat. He was incredibly jacked up, and he would be proud of that. He invented Monster Energy drink, whether he knows it or not. He lived it.
Howard, Ron Dante is doing a great job with Mark, keeping the Happy Together alive and the Turtles.
Yeah, he is.
You don't miss it? You don't feel, oh, I could have been up there for that particular show? Any chance you're going to pop in once or twice?
No, there's never a chance I'm going to pop in twice or once. No, it's not in the cards. I don't see myself coming out and surprising everybody with a cake. I'm not that guy. I don't care. And I will never go to see the Happy Together tour because I do have, feelings about it. And if there's anything I do miss, it's the shows. I love the shows. The shows gave back everything that the rest of the time drained out of me.
Oh,
So if it weren't for the recharge, I wouldn't have done it at all. I just can't do the tour bus, you know. God bless Willie Nelson, but let me tell you something. He's out of his mind, and he must have a back from hell, because I've lived my life in the back room of those damn tour buses, and they're on the wrong side of the wheels. They bounce around like hell. You know, it's like riding in a skateboard. It's no fun. I don't care what's on the television or what's for dinner or who flooded the bathroom last, because it's going to flood. Those things, as luxurious as they are just rolling outhouses.
let me ask one recording question. Dirty Ducks, Dust Bunnies, any of those tracks unreleased that we'll ever hear or see?
You know, I was talking to Mark about it not more than a week ago, and we were talking about Dirty Duck, and I believe that's going to see the light of day. I believe that we will see Dirty Duck coming out, or at least to stream this year.
Great.
I hope it does, because there were some great little jazz things that we did with a whole other band, another great bunch of guys from the Midwest of America who called themselves the Robs. They were brothers, and they used to perform on Dick Clark's Where the Action Is television show. They were like the house band, these brothers and a cousin, and they wound up being our band for an album or two, and certainly on the Dirty Duck soundtrack, all of it. And that was just one of the strangest projects I've ever worked on in my life.
Well, I just want to thank you for being on the show today with us, Howard. And as I said, you are a true rock and roll legend, and you have one of the greatest voices of rock and roll that's going to live on forever and ever. Thanks for being on the show. Sir.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, man. Thank you, Charles. Appreciate both you guys a lot.